try to maintain yourself in that space of entrancement by meaning that is indicated to you by music, because the arts, of course, point the way, as everyone has always known, I would say. So, anyways, again, I would say in the celebrity atheist community, such things are not taken with due seriousness, and I think that's a real problem.
And I think I see a way, without having to go to religion or to belief in God, where art can fulfill that need that we have. And I think the same pleasure that can be acquired from religious belief, I believe we can get that kind of artistic inspiration from art.
Well, the question is there that, see, I would say in some sense that's the last... Look, we could say that there's all sorts of different religious phenomena, and some of them are articulated as explicit beliefs. And those are the ones that are most amenable to rational criticism and the most likely to expire because of that. But then there's other religious phenomena that are much more difficult to tear apart rationally. Ritual, dance, art, music, beauty, and all of those things have been used, for example, inside cathedrals, in other religious ceremonies, to heighten the religious sense. The artistic world is a pointer to the religious world. Now, if you're rationalistic and you've criticized your explicit religious beliefs out of existence, perhaps for valid reasons, you're going to default to the pre-verbal manifestation of the same impulse. And it's much more ineradicable, which I think is partly why music has become such a dominant force in our culture, is the religious, we require religious grounding. Without it, you're hopeless, by definition, because what you need to not be hopeless is meaning. And some things speak to you in a meaningful way. Now, you may say, well, I can't get the meaning from the explicit statements of religion. My rational mind criticizes those statements to death and leaves them not only dead for me, but it even makes me antipathetic towards them. But what will happen then is you'll fall down a level of abstraction into something like music or dance or art, if you're fortunate, if you have the temperament for that. Or perhaps you'll just fall into something like nihilism, which is a much more catastrophic consequence.
I agree.
But art and beauty and literature and music, they're pointers. They're pointers in some sense to a transcendent domain. That's why they have their power. And the essence of that transcendent domain is the same. It's the ground from which religious notions spring. It's the same thing. So, and if you look at this developmentally, or say anthropologically, this is completely evident. Before our culture differentiated itself so extremely, dance and music and art and chanting and poetry, all of that was all integrated into one solid cultural form that was essentially religious in its nature. It's been fragmented and differentiated in our culture, which for better or for worse. But you don't have to trace it back very far until you see all of that as the unity that makes culture a reality. And it's not the transmission of explicit statements of fact about the structure of the world. That isn't what makes up culture. Culture is something more like a musical dance that we all engage in. And again, I don't see that fact, since we like to talk about facts, I don't see that fact being addressed seriously by the celebrity atheist types. Right. They tend to write that off. Music, it's an epiphenomenon. It's like, no, actually, it's not. That's just wrong. You can't even understand language properly unless you can understand music, because music has language has a musical element. So,
yeah, and I see, I get the concept of art being pointers now, and I understand the religiosity of music and how that feels being a part. You hear that song at the right time, your favorite song live with other people, and you get that charge. And I get that feeling.
That's the thing, that charge.
So I get that aspect, but where I always kind of laugh out loud is once a supernatural being of some kind or a god is then implemented, because I don't see a need for an idol like that.
Well, like I said, you don't want to be simple-minded about these sorts of things. Like, once you've got to the point, when I listen to Dawkins talk, for example, about religion and his criticisms of fundamentalism, I think, well, you've dipped your toe in the ocean. It's like, yeah, okay, you've got the obvious criticisms right, but you haven't started to grapple with the real questions. Like that sense that grips you, let's say when you're playing music, that's a really good example. Yeah. Here's a question. Just what the hell's going on? Like, so imagine what you're doing, eh? Like when you're let's say you're improvising with a bunch of people. So first of all, weirdly enough, you can do it on the fly. And it's really complicated. So you're generating these patterns on the fly, right? And you're really into it. It grips you. It grips your whole body. If you start to think about it consciously, you'll screw up, right? It has to flow. It's not a left brain activity, technically speaking. It's a right brain activity. It has to flow. So your whole body, you have to be embodied in the music. And you have to participate in that process of having the patterns unfold. But interestingly enough, you can do that with a bunch of other people at the same time. You can get on the same wavelength. And there's something really entrancing about that entrainment, right? And then the whole audience can participate in that. And that's when the joint gets rocking, right? And everyone's thrilled about that. They're all moving together, right? And that moving together, that's a primary cultural phenomena. What you want in your culture is for people to move together. And you know that music grounds culture. Like, people have their subcultures that are based in music. Well, that's because music, since time immemorial, has been used to cement people together, to have them move together, and to occupy the same pattern space as the substructure of the culture within which they're embedded. And to ignore the primary religious nature of that, or to confuse that, to ignore the primary religious nature of that, because you can say, here's some explicit statements that some religions have made that I can criticize rationally, is to be blind to the much more profound relationship between the meaning evoked by such rituals, let's say, and the primary religious impulse.